The only thing you really need, though, is just a pattern. That's all music comes down to. What we perceive as being musical or non-musical has to do with the presence of a pattern. In fact, sounds that have pitch, they only have pitch because their frequencies, their audio frequencies, actually form a pattern. If a sound wave does not form a pattern with itself, it won't be perceived as having pitch.
Yeah. The overtone pattern, right? Is that what you're kind of getting?
Yes, the overtones a bit, but also just a pattern in the shape of the waves as well. Because the overtones have more of an impact on your timbre. All right, depending on which overtones, which partials, how many of them there are, how strong some of them are. That's what creates the sound and the characteristics of like the difference between a French horn and a piano playing the same note. But the pitch itself just comes from the waves having repeatable pattern, a frequency. That's all a pitch is the frequency. So if we know that patterns are what matter, then to create a chord progression, all you need is a pattern. So, for example, have you learned period structure and sentence structure for melodies?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You can use those for chord progressions. You can also use them for rhythms. So let's do a period structure.
How do you? Well, that's interesting. Using it for chord progression?
Yeah. Watch.
Yeah.
All right. So this is I love this because this is something I discovered recently because ultimately all it is, you're looking for different patterns. So if we create a 2-chord idea, this is our motif, and this is one of my favorites. Let me find my pedal. I gotta get some WD-40 on this chair.
Let's see.
A minor to D major. All right, so that's our first motif. Period structure says create something new. All right, so what if we do F major, and then we go A minor again. Or let's do E minor. So we've got our first idea, a 2-chord idea that we just like. And then we just need to create another 2-chord idea that we like. Then period structure says repeat the same chords from our first motif. Or if you want, you can repeat them with a slight amount of variation. And then end with a cadence. So we'll do A minor. Let's do E major. And then we'll do A minor. And you can do the same thing with sentence structure. You got your motif, new idea. Motif, cadence. First idea. New idea. Repeat the same idea with a little bit of variation. And then cadence.
Okay.
And all we didn't use functional harmony. We didn't use any of that. We just created a pattern. So this is one thing you do. Again, like I said, if you wanted, we could, let's delete this. Let's move these new chords over here. And we could do sentence structure again. Like I said, a new idea, but this time we can have a shift. So the small shift could be either changing the inversion, or you could just change the chord by one note. So we'll do, I have no idea how this is going to sound, but let's try it. And it's always going to work because it forms a pattern. Chord progressions that don't work, they fail to work because they don't have a pattern. The way we listen to music, the way we make sense of music is because of the context. All right. We don't exist only on one chord at a time. It's not like I play A minor and then I go to D major and I completely forget A minor. Since it's no longer playing, it's gone. I have no context. It's like it never existed. That's not the way our brains work, fortunately. We have that memory of A minor, so we're able to relate these two together. And our brain is very, very good at creating patterns and recognizing patterns. And more importantly, our brain is supremely good at recognizing things that break a pattern, things that stick out. That's a survival mechanism. All right. If we're able to notice something that's wrong, something that's not right, it helps us be wary of it, to be careful and not to get hurt. And so this, ironically, this survival mechanism also plays a big part in how we enjoy music. So we've done that. I'm actually going to save these chord progressions because I've got a roommate who wanted me to give him some chord progressions to work with, and I'll just give him these.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about like harmonic motifs before. So.
Right? Oh, you can have all kinds of harmonic motifs. You can have harmonic motifs. You can have instrumental motifs. Like you can use period structure to decide on the order of your instruments. You've got an instrument that plays one like phrase. Then you have a different instrument come in for a phrase. And then when you come back, you're back to the original instrument. Then you find a new instrument to end it all. There's all kinds of things you can create. When you realize that music is just simply a pattern, it opens so many things up for you. And the way that you manipulate those patterns. So a couple other patterns we can go with. For example, let's start with C major. Another one that's very common is tertian harmony. You just move by thirds.
So in this way, then you're not really even are you still thinking about the like the consonants and dissonance of the notes you're using, like, or are you just kind of going off ear and just putting patterns in?
It's going off ear. Not most of the time, if you follow a pattern of some sort, it's going to work.
So it doesn't even matter too much what notes you pick. It's more about the pattern that's the important thing. Then.
Exactly. All right.
Wow,
now, if you're careful with the notes you choose, you can have more control. But for example, I just followed these chords in thirds. This is called tertian harmony. Very kind of cinematic sound because tertian harmony is very popular in film music. We can also follow the same example and go with chordal harmony or any other interval we want. So we'll go up by fourths. Let's do B minor. And then we can so it's C major. Let's do this. Let's voice lead a little, shall we?
So were you still thinking about the key you're in at this point, or?
Nope.
No?
Yep, because functional harmony, you don't have to. You can if you want to. Mm-hmm. But remember, functional
How would you write a melody over it if you don't even, how do you know what key to use?
You would, so if you write a melody over this or any other kind of adventurous harmony, so for example, let's go over this one over here that we did. This has some chords that are technically borrowed from the Dorian mode. A couple different things that you can kind of come up with. You can try to understand it if you want, but you don't need to. Because what we could do is just start again with a pattern. Let's see. Let's start with target tones first. C and then E. All right. All I'm doing is taking notes from the chord underneath it. I'm going to form a basic pattern. All right. So I've got my first motif. If I want to do...
Wow. So here you're writing without even thinking about the key that you're in, then you just pattern?
Exactly. Just patterns.
I've never thought of it like that.
Because that's all it is. That's all functional harmony is it's a complicated pattern. It's a very useful pattern, but once you realize that the only prerequisite to make something sound musical is to follow a pattern, to have some logic or reason behind it. So we could use, like I said, you could follow this idea. I've got two chords. I've got a basic idea. Let's try going again. We'll go repeat our pattern. And then we'll get a new idea. Then we'll do... And then we'll do just end. All right, and this is a very bare bones melody. And it's going to be, so this is what I would call like a structure. I've got my chord tones, and so then I would listen to this, I might make some changes, and I might turn it into a better melody. But for the most part, I have the shape, the basic kind of rough melody. So if I might say, like, let's do a little bit more syncopation.
Is that Dorian? Sounds like some medieval stuff. Right?
Oh yeah, it's a bit of Dorian. So like A minor to D. This is what's called a modal cadence. Because A minor, and A Dorian. The only note that's different is F sharp. That's the only note they have different. So for A Dorian, any chord that uses the F sharp is going to sound distinctly Dorian. So that could be D major. That could be F sharp diminished. It could be B minor. There's all kinds of things that you can do with it. But those characteristic chords, the chords from a mode that contain the one unique note. For minor modes, they have one note that's unique from a natural minor scale. And for major modes, they have one note that's unique from a major scale. And so any chord you use that makes use of that one note is going to have the characteristic sound of that mode. And so anytime you pair the tonic of your mode with one of those characteristic chords, that's called a modal cadence. And it's the most stereotypical sound you'll get from that mode. But yeah, so you could say, I've got a chord progression, and I'm just going to write a melody. This is very common in things like epic music or trailer music, where it's traditionally a genre that was developed by non-classically trained composers who went based off the rule of sound is king. If I like the way it sounds, I don't care about the theory behind why it works. I just like the way it sounds. So we were talking about like another pattern you could find. And like I said, if you write a chord progression like this, not caring about the key, that's fine. You can just write the melody, like I said, by using that pattern of taking notes from your chords and using that to create a basic melody, create a basic shape, and then turn that into a full-on melody. Does that make sense?
Yep. Doesn't though, I noticed if you don't think about the key that you're writing and you just go off by ear, in the end, doesn't your ear kind of guide you back to like kind of almost being in key in theory? Because theory is like just analyzing what sounds good to us, right? Like won't we naturally like default to something that makes sense rather than just sounding good? Like it still goes back to some kind of theory though, wouldn't it?
It might. I mean, and probably, if that's what you're used to, because if most of us listen to music written with functional harmony for the most part. But the idea is with functional harmony, you are remaining consciously within a single key. With this can take you all over the place. So for example, this chord progression I just wrote, this is neither Dorian nor minor. So we've got A minor, D major. That would say, oh, it's a Dorian. All right, A minor, D major. Doubling down on Dorian, F major. Whoa. An F natural does not belong in Dorian. That belongs in A minor. And then we've got E minor. All right, that could be either A minor or Dorian. E major. Whoa. E major does not belong in A Dorian. That is a very characteristically A minor sound. So we're all over the place here. And that's something that I was able to create just because either I have the knowledge of A Dorian and A minor and I'm being very deliberate with where and how I'm borrowing the chords, or I just used a pattern to guide my chord choice. And I just picked chords that I thought sounded nice. Yeah. So all of this went back to the question you had. It's been a long tangent, but all of this came back from the question where you said, how do you use functional harmony with non-Western music? So if you want to use an Eastern scale, for example, an Eastern culture scale, or maybe an indigenous culture's scale that doesn't use the same rules or guidelines as functional harmony, it's not been Westernized, well, then you can't, by definition, use functional harmony because functional harmony is a Western music idea. But keeping in mind what that rule that transcends all musical cultures, that it's just patterns. Functional harmony was developed because a bunch of old composers in the Baroque period understood that patterns are what make music. And so they were fascinated during the Baroque period. That was, I believe, the same time as the Renaissance. They were fascinated with the study of like Pythagoras's theories on music and the overtone series and how all of these pitches relate to each other. And so they were codifying all of this really cool music. So the Baroque period was defined by scientific curiosity. Humankind, like the Renaissance, we were fascinated with science. And so music theory was developed by the science of music. People were trying to apply science to music for the first time. The first time in Western history. And so they started to find different ways that these chords felt like they related to each other. But they related to each other because they formed patterns. And so if you want to free yourself of Western music theory, or at least broaden your horizons a bit, then you can try all kinds of crazy stuff. The only thing you need is to form some kind of pattern. Whether you're moving each chord by a certain interval, or maybe every chord shares the same shape. That was common in jazz, where it doesn't matter what key you're staying in, every chord is going to just be a major chord. And you can do a bunch of crazy stuff like that. Or maybe you're moving your chords by a certain interval, whether it's a fifth, a fourth, a third, a second, a seventh, a sixth, whatever. Another common one is just keeping a common tone. So long as every single chord in your progression has one common tone in common, it doesn't matter what key they're from, it's going to probably sound like it works because there's a pattern. And so if you ever want to do something where you don't understand the rules, or you don't understand the theory, or you're just venturing into new waters, you can always remember, it doesn't matter. As long as you make a pattern of some sort, this will come off as passably musical. And that's why lots of people have such a, that's another, like kind of another tangent. That's why so many people reject ultra-modern music, or they reject the modernist movement of the 20th century with composers like Aaron Schoenberg, where it's music all over the place and it feels wrong. And people are like, that's not music. Well, it's because they were deliberately aware of this fact that music takes patterns. And so, all right, what if we just actively reject the idea of a pattern? What if we just have chaos and avant-garde ideas and there is no pattern governing our decisions? That's why lots of people are like, that's not music. I don't like that. It's because it's passing itself off as music, but it has no pattern. It's not making any connections anywhere, right?
I mean, if you had a scene that was chaos, that would be perfect, right? Huh? Like in a movie or something.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So yeah, that kind of stuff is very useful for, again, like horror movies.
Yeah.
And it's great for like horror movies and stuff because when you're trying to remove a sense of familiarity, when you're deliberately trying to create this sense of something is wrong, one of the best ways to do that is to immediately make it feel wrong. All right, and remove the pattern. Or whether you're working with like kind of tritone chords or set theory or minor second chords, which we've covered in this class. And if you'll go back, remember what I said about using tritone chords and minor second chords. The way to make them work is to form some kind of pattern. If you can establish a pattern with the chords you're using, no matter how dissonant or weird or out of pocket the kind of harmonic language is, again, it's going to function on some level. That's all functional harmony is. It's a clever way that people found to create complicated patterns that weren't too predictable but sounded nice, right?
Well, okay then. So in that case then, because you talked about like functional and then tertiary, all these different kinds of harmonies, how many kinds of different harmonies are there and of ways people do things? Or is it like countless or
so many? Basically, so all it is, functional harmony, tertiary harmony. I'm sure there's another one I'm blanking on, but it's basically like chord relationships. I'm blanking on the name. But there's all kinds. It's basically all of these types of harmonies are. The only thing they are is at some point someone said, I want to figure out how to study this. All right, so I'm going to put up a series of rules or a procedure of what to look for. And that's what I'm going to use to analyze this. So functional harmony analyzes based off the relationship of those three functional groups. It separates the chords into a pattern of tonic, subdominant, and dominant functioning chords and says we're going to analyze all of this music based off this guiding principle. And we're going to shoehorn things in to force it to realize why this fits. Tertiary harmony says, all right, I like the way this sounds, and I've noticed the pattern is I move by thirds. So I'm just going to call it tertiary harmony. The chordal harmony is harmony where they're like, all right, I'm going to reject the idea of the triad. I am now going to, because a triad is built in thirds. You're built in thirds. So what if I reject that idea and I create a chord based on fourths? And that's chordal harmony. Quintal harmony is very similar. You're going to build a chord on fifths. All of these things are, all it is someone found a sound they liked. They found a strategy or a pattern that they liked. And they thought, this is awesome. I claim it. I name it so other people can understand it. Does that make sense?
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So yeah, any kind of harmony that you want to study, it's just because someone liked it and they gave it a name.
The composing without thinking about the key, aren't you subconsciously, like, or maybe this is cultural, I don't know, but aren't you subconsciously still thinking about like a home, like a stable home key?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and then moving away and then back, like your ear will naturally take you to that, right?
Oh yeah, and that's because of the pattern. All right.
Oh, okay.
So that idea of a home,
it's only there because of the pattern, right?
It's there because of the pattern.
Okay.
So, for example, like the pattern, like in functional harmony, major harmony, and minor harmony, that was designed with the idea of the tonic. All right. Every chord, the three functional groups, all those are ways of describing how every single chord in a key relates to the one chord. So, if a chord is called a tonic functioning chord, it's because it carries, bless you, similar levels of tension, similar levels of pull as the tonic. So those are all tonic chords because they don't have a lot of tension. Subdominant chords have some kind of resolve. So if I were to go from E minor to C major, there's not this big sense of release. All right? If I go F major to C major, suddenly there's a little bit of like an intangible sense of, oh, that resolved somehow. And again, it's because the F goes to E. And then if we go to, that feels massively resolved. And so all of those three functions, they're basically, the tonic chords are the chords that when they move to the tonic, there's no big payoff. They just feel like, all right, they're all on this level playing ground. The subdominant chords feel like, oh yeah, there's some payoff when you go to the tonic chords. And there's some payoff when you go to a dominant. And the dominant chords get their biggest payoff when they go to a tonic functioning chord. And so the whole idea of functional harmony, major keys and minor keys, the patterns you build are based off entirely how does every single chord in that key relate to the one chord in terms of how much energy pulls them towards it. So that's one super clever, super awesome chord pattern that allows a lot of variety. But say something like, here we go. We had our, what was this? This was our sentence structure pattern. Sentence structure had the same chord, then a related idea, then a new idea, and then a cadence. Our cadence brought us back to A minor. And if you noticed, A minor was a very very frequent presence throughout it.
Yeah.
So A minor feels like the home to our chord progression.
I see.
And if you were to do something like tertian harmony, eventually you'll probably find your way back to C major if you keep moving in thirds. Or you might use it as a way to modulate or change keys and go somewhere else. If you use a common tone, which was something that was used very often in, for example, Claude Debussy in the Impressionist era really championed that idea, that you create a tonal center, a home, based off of forced repetition. We could do. All right, and so here, every single chord uses C minor or C natural, except for when I break the whole pattern to use my cadence. Which that's the one thing you can establish a pattern, and the only time where you can break the pattern and get away with it without establishing a new pattern is with a cadence. So each of these chords were chosen because of C minor or C natural. And so if we wanted to, let's actually make, I like that one. Let's make this something a little more interesting. We'll go A flat minor. So something deliberately out of key. That pattern works because we established all of them are related. And you could probably say, after that chord progression, what is the most important note? C.
Mm-hmm.
Because you hear that C playing constantly throughout the whole thing. So there's all kinds of patterns. That's literally the only requirement. If you want a musical idea to work, you form a pattern. All right, it's found at all levels. All right, so again, what gives a sound pitch? There's a pattern in the sound waves. What makes a chord progression work? What makes a chord work in the first place? It's a pattern. Moving in threes. All right, if you use a cluster, even that kind of works. But the fact that you've got a pattern, chords are built in thirds for the most part. That works. What makes a chord progression work? It's a pattern. What makes a melody work? A pattern. What is musical structure and form? It's literally just a pattern. ABA structure, ternary form. That is an A, a first idea, a new idea, then a return to the original idea. That's a pattern. Now, when you've got music that sounds like it's meandering, it's definitely music, but it's meandering, and it feels like something's wrong. It just doesn't feel like it resolved. It doesn't feel like it's structured. It's typically because there's no pattern. Whoever was writing it got too self-conscious about repeating ideas. That's very common with young composers. They get self-conscious about this idea of repeating themselves. And they end up just kind of coming up with new things. They have one idea, then they move on to another new idea. They come up to another new idea, then another new idea. And then it just keeps going on and on. It sounds like there's no pattern, there's no consistency, and so their music sounds like it's meandering. Their music quality suffers because of that, because they're not willing to
balance. No familiarity, right?
Yeah,
is
exactly.
That what it is?
Yes, you'll hear that all the time when you first learn it, is balancing familiarity with novelty or something new or whatever phrase people use. But that's a huge thing in music, and the reason why you need to balance familiarity with novelty or something new or something engaging is because of the pattern. You're forming a pattern. That's all you need at the end of the day. If you want your music to work, if I had said if there was one thing, only one thing that I would teach a person and then say, go, that's it. That's the only composing lesson you ever get. That's what it would be. It would be learn how to spot and create patterns in music. If you can figure that out, all of your music is going to start to make sense.
Right. Okay, I see that. Okay. Is other than we always talk about sentence and period. Are there any others, maybe? Or
oh yeah. So for example, there's the idea of a sequencing structure. So if you just take an idea and keep moving it up or keep moving it down. So if this was my motif, and I just moved it up. All I did is I took my motif, I kept moving it up, or kept it stable, moved it up, kept it stable, kept it moved up, kept stable, until, again, you interrupt with your cadence, whatever that may be.
Okay. So is that one like just taking the same pattern but slight variations in each, like A1, A2, A3? You
could. This one though is literally just moving the same idea up and down.
Okay.
So literally my idea was it was a 1, a third, and a second. So then I moved it up. Another third and another second. Then I repeated it because I just felt like that made sense. Then I moved the idea again. Another third and a second. That's because sequencing in music, what sequencing means is you take an idea and you just move it up or you move it down. So a sequenced chord progression would be like a C major, then a D major, E major, F major. All I'm doing is I'm taking a major chord and I'm sequencing it. I'm moving it up or I'm moving it down. So if we were to have that same idea, That's another idea. It's the same exact idea. I'm just moving it up or down. That's actually Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Bum 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 bum. That
Oh yeah.
entire first thing, all he's doing is sequencing it. Bum 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 bum. So then he changes it a little bit, but
Right.
most of it is just taking that one little idea and moving it up and up, or down and down. And so that's another form of pattern. So there's sentence structure, period structure, sequencing structure. Um, those are the three that I usually teach. But again, you can come up with anything you like.
Yeah, as long as it's a pattern, right?
Exactly.
You do what you want, right?
Yes.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
long as it's a pattern, it's gonna work.
Okay. Okay. Anything else to add on to that, or?
No, I think I'm kind of like
Yeah.
I love talking about this because
Mhm.
this was a huge light bulb moment for me when I realized that that's literally all music is manipulating patterns with your music, with your sounds. You can use this for example, if you want to write an interesting ostinato, sentence structure, period structure, sequencing structure, do something, some form of pattern. You want to create a chord progression, make a pattern. You want to just format a long piece of music, form a pattern. If you don't know what to do, like you've written a theme and you're like, all right, I feel like that's good, but it doesn't feel like a full piece. All right, just make a pattern. All right, you've got one idea, let's move on to another one. You've got that new idea, that's nice, you feel like you reached the end of that, find a way to go back to the original one. Then maybe a new idea, then the original. That's rondo form suddenly. The rondo form is just repeating the same idea over and over again, but with a different verse in between. Rondo form is basically like a song where you have the refrain you always come back to, and every single verse is something new. It's a new melody. That's all rondo form is. But yeah, all you have to do is find a way to make a pattern. If you can make a pattern, you want to make ambient music. Ambient music is another thing. Create patterns and make it work. Any genre you want to work with, if you can find out what patterns are most common in that genre, you're going to learn a lot. Like what kind of rhythms are the most common, what kind of melodic structures are the most common, what kind of instrument patterns are there. And it's not necessarily sequential patterns, but if you notice, for example, in epic music, every time they want to have the climax and the big moment in the music, the brass section enters, and they had mysteriously been absent for a measure or two beforehand. That's a pattern. That's something that you notice in the genre all the time. The brass, when they went for an impact, they take some time off, so we forget about them. Then boom, they enter, huge impact. It's literally, like I said, it's just about patterns. So I geek out so much when I talk about this because for me, like I said, it was such an important light bulb moment, and I hope that it's useful for other people in the same way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I've always thought about it as in like